That was a great introduction to where I'm going to start. I'm going to talk both about some basic research I do and some design work I do. That's where I'll lead to at the end, around what I call alternative infrastructures for learning. So the goals for the talk are to do those things. To talk about the basic research I do, to talk about the design work I do, and something I never really have done in a talk or in writing as explicitly as I'm going to try to do here, which is show how the basic field research I do begets ideas for what I'm going to call durable tools and durable learning environments. Further on the talk, you're going to hear me worry about the issue of the sustainability of learning innovations. It's something that's caught me in a number of my efforts over the last 20 years. It's something that NSF cares a lot about. A lot of people try things, and they're great, and then they disappear. And so it's something I want us to think about together. And then but on the other side, I also want to think about one of the roles of a learning scientist is to create durable ideas that are attached to the world and that are meaningfully useful. So I'm going to try to show both how I've tried to produce durable ideas and durable tools and learning environments. So I'm going to jump right into the argument I want to make. This may be very familiar to this kind of audience. The argument is that the entrenched infrastructure of typical K-12 compulsory schooling creates two related problems. The first is that the materials, the stuff that kids use, and the teachers, associated practices of what I'll call industrial education, disengage and alienate students. What that entails then is that the entrenched infrastructure makes it difficult to sustain innovative learning experiences that seek to overcome this disengagement and alienation. So I'm going to try to work on that problem here today. Why use the term infrastructure? Actually, the term in the sense I'm using it was created here at the University of Illinois. It means pervasive, interconnected organization, something that becomes commonplace, expected, invisible to users, the roads as a common example. It's hard to change piecemeal because of this interconnected nature. And infrastructure is easier to say than the social, material, spatial, informational, representational, evaluative, temporal organization of an environment and its practices all tied together. So infrastructure for short. And this term is adapted from Jeff Bowker and Lee Starr, who I knew Lee pretty well before she died. So there's a picture of this entrenched infrastructure that's, those are all boys, but it's not that different in many schools. It's not that different in the good schools that my children go to on the North Shore of Chicago. Schooling has unusual response to what are natural human tendencies. So here is an image from Singapore schooling in a high-stakes testing moment in a crowded room. That's a real picture of foldered blinders that have been put on the heads of children so that they can't possibly see what anyone else is doing. But of course, in real life, if the goal were really to circulate knowledge and learning, they wouldn't not only have those blinders off, but they would be talking and exchanging ideas, and that's a lot of what I study. So I started with this analogy. I want to have you take it seriously. In this room, an educated audience, and in many, we now recognize the undesirable effects of industrial food production. That's the infamous pink slime that holds, commercial meat together. But what about the undesirable effects of industrial education production? And I really want us collectively, and I'm trying to take this analogy seriously. So here's one question. Was it due to young people's health to mostly consume, quote, food in the form of fast food and factory-produced packaged products? Now, we all partake of those things. It's part of being in society. But when it's mostly that. Here's the analogy. What does it do to young people's interests, their engagement, their persistence, their curiosity, mostly to experience learning in the form of worksheets, textbooks, and graded times tests? So that's the analogy I'm going to work on. So if that argument's compelling that we need alternatives, where should we look for alternatives? So here I'm going to do a shout out to someone I have had the opportunity to work with at the University of Washington. He did all of his work in Chicago. He's a venerable and lovely man, Howard Becker, who is in his 80s now, and he's still alive and kicking and writing. And hopefully, within a couple of years, a collection of his educational writings will come out, and I will be its editor. We don't know, but we hope that will happen. So I'm going to read a quote from a famous paper of Becker's with the provocative title, "A School is a Lousy Place to Learn Anything." And so I'll read this quote and I'll show you how it connects to the point I'm making. So Becker wrote at the beginning of this paper, he just went right at it at the beginning of the paper, "Institutions create myths to explain to their participants what they do, how they do it, why society needs it done, and how successful they are. Every institution fails in some measure to do the job it promises, and its functionaries find it necessary to explain both that they're trying to do better and that the disparity between the promise and performance does not exist, is not serious, or occurs only rarely." Here's where it gets interesting. Institutional apology is divert our attention from the way the very organization of an institution produces its failures. Further, they divert us from comparisons which might show how others under a different name and different rhetoric, i.e. not school, actually perform the institution's characteristic function more effectively, meaning there might be institution in places and settings that perform the function of supporting and generating learning better than the place that we've named to do that. And so that was Becker's provocation, and it set me in many ways on a career to looking at other places for productive learning. So where else do we look? And here I'm sharing a diagram I created. Actually, I didn't create it, I conceived of it. My wife here, who's on campus today, created this. And I have many of you who do this kind of work, I really argue for working with people who are good with graphic design and pictures. This has been a very widely circulated picture, and if you had seen my version of it, I don't think it would have gotten much past my office. But the idea of this picture is meant to show that if you add up all the time people spend in the subject matters, math, science, history, literacy, take out recess, take out everything else, those are the things that our field, whether we're learning scientists, educational scientists, C&I people, this is what we've given almost all of our attention to over the last 40 years. But if you look at that in terms of time, even in the period when we spend the most time, it's only 18.5% of our waking hours. And through the rest of our lives, it's much, much less. So what that means is there is potentially all of this learning going on in the sea of blue that we are not understanding and we are not leveraging. So that's been the basic premise of a lot of my work, and it's the premise that I brought to the Life Center, of which this has sort of become the founding anchoring document. So I study cognition and learning in this way, out in the sea of blue. I'll say a little bit more about it, but I'm not the only sort of person, and I'm sure there are laboratory psychologists in the room, so I'll preface this comment with some of my best friends are laboratory psychologists. The view from the laboratory, if you do a computation, actually this is a shared computation of mine and Ed Hutchins, who teaches a class similar to an undergraduate class I teach at Northwestern. If you count up all the laboratory events, the cognition events, on any one day, you make this estimate, you get, oh, it's not showing up. That's about 7 times 10 to the 5th. It's not showing up. So that's the number of, across the globe, events that are used to count as cognition in laboratory research. Against that background, there's this tiny little thing out in the corner called everyday cognition. It's not really on the radar of most lab psychology studies. Let's look at it from the other way. A thought experiment invented device from Ed. He called it the cognito-scope. This is the device that can capture all of the cognition events on the planet in any one day. When you run those together, do that calculation and call that cognition, this little dot looks a little different. And that little dot now is the percentage of laboratory cognition events of all on the planet on any one day is 1 in 10 million. So the question becomes, the obvious question is, maybe those are the right tasks to be studying. Are they representative? I won't belabor the point, but if you think about the tasks that people perform in labs, or in zoos, or in the wild, we have good reasons to think the organization of those tasks, those forms of cognition are different. So all of that is to set up studies in the sea of blue. And these are just some pictures from a lot of the different places I've been. Before I came and gave the talk today, I did a little quick count. I've been at about 25 different field sites over the last 20 years. And what I think I'm doing, and here I'll draw on some definitions from Hutchins, is working to build this field of cognitive ecology. And Hutchins defines that term simply. It's the study of cognitive phenomena in context. And in my work, I've given special attention to the phenomena of learning. Hutchins' definition, which is workable for me, is the adaptive, very important word in his definition of learning, reorganization of a complex system. So learning isn't necessarily what you're taught. It can be what you're taught, but it has to be adaptive to some problem or some situation that you're facing in the world. So in the basic studies I'm doing, this is what I'm trying to build in our field, not in opposition to laboratory cognition studies, but in complement. Because I think we're not going to know enough about human cognition if we don't have a robust cognitive ecology to say things about, and some of my best conversations with my friends who are academic psychologists are when we have our heads around the same phenomena, but one is organized in the field and one is organized in the lab. So I just want to make the pitch that the kind of work I'm doing has met with advocacy from one of the most important new voices in the field, and I'll just read this quote. This person says, a series of constantly multiplying careful reports on the conditions which experience has shown in actual cases to be favorable and unfavorable to learning would revolutionize the whole subject of learning. The problem is complex and difficult, yet the progress of a science of education depends on the systematic accumulation of just this sort of material. Anybody guess who this current thinker is? That's something that John Dewey wrote in 1929. So I believe that, and that's the kind of work I've been trying to do, is accumulate those actual cases and think about what's favorable and unfavorable. It's surprising that Dewey said it that long ago, and it's still a very thin strand within our field. So now I'm going to turn to one line of studies that to kind of exemplify some of the work I do. And this is work that's focused on children, media, and learning. It's a line of work I started not so long ago with a study in the Life Center about video game play, and I'll say a little bit more about that. But this is something on everyone's mind, and the increasingly pervasive nature of technology is something we ought to be working on. And I don't know if you can see what the baby is texting here. He's, OMG, I just got born. So to put this in context a little more, to reimpose it on this image, Kaiser's study a number of years ago about, actually, sorry, this is a Common Sense Media study. This is some data on the usage of media by kids in the 0 to 8 range. Television still dominates their usage. So the total media time for kids in that age range is 3 hours and 14 minutes. If I impose that upon that, look at the amount of time, waking time, if you think about how much longer kids sleep, 21.5% of time that kids spend engaged with media outside of school. So it dwarfs the amount of time that they are engaged with school-like work. We ought to understand it. We ought to understand what its affordances are, what kids are learning with it, what ways we might catalyze new things with it. This number gets worse when you go to the 8 to 18 study from Kaiser. 50% of kids' waking hours are spent with media. Now, don't start lamenting, because I'm going to give you reasons not to lament and say that we ought to understand this. So I'm doing this work inside a line of studies that I call learning in media controversies. And I want to one of the things I wanted to do in this talk is sort of show you how I frame the work I do and try to make it relevant to audiences beyond the academy and to myself. So what makes a learning in media controversy? First of all, it has to be something that kids are very engaged in and pervasively interested in. So kids' engagement and interest is the first thing. If it's a form of media that they're not interested in, not that I'm not interested in it, but that's a leading criteria. Then here's the main thing. And this is the video game study that really got us going on this. You're going to hear voices. Video games bad for kids, bad for learning, bad, 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 bad. You're going to hear then the counter voice. Video games complex, video games interesting, video games good, 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 better than school, good, good, good. When we got started, there was no ethnographic research. on natural, everyday gameplay. There wasn't even a base to say, here's what it looks like from somewhat of a research standpoint. So people would say, here's what my kid did, here's what my kid did. So putting those things together was an occasion to go and look. And many have probably heard this phrase, there are moral panics about whatever kids are engaged in all the time. And that's usually a good hot button issue. I don't know if you know some of the history of this with media. For example, comic books were once thought to induce hysteria in girls, which I don't know that they ever did. So those are the criteria, and so there's 3 studies we've done. One that has just begun about 3 months ago. But the first study was a study of video game play in kids' homes. We did a study of TV viewing. Surprisingly, not only was there no study of this kind that really looked ethnographically at regular video game play, in 70 years since Ellen Sider, who was a media scholar at Harvard, wrote a paper writing a program for research on television, there are 2 or 3 studies that look at natural TV viewing. People do it in labs, and they do it in really creative ways. The other Richard Anderson does really interesting things in this area with Blue's Clues and stuff. But natural TV viewing among young children, which, if you remember the statistics I shared, is the dominant media engagement for kids in that young age. So we did these 2 studies, and now we're beginning a 3rd study, which is more ambitious and harder. And we're following young people in the Chicago area around their whole daily round with respect to the media we're using. We're trying to engage as diverse a set of young people as possible, ethnically, gender, SES, and especially looking across their lives. And of course, these devices like this become the primary object of our attention. So I'm going to tell you about one of these studies, and now I'm going to kind of take you through the cycle of how I do some of the work, how I generate some ethnographic findings, and where it leads me, both in terms of engaging theoretical questions with other people in the field, in this case, an engagement with Jim G., who's, for those of you who've thought and read about video games, everyone knows Jim's work, and you should. And then how it's led to some design ideas, things that can be designed to that. So the first study, 2000, 2005, and 2006, we went into people's homes. It's challenging to go out into the world and do this. I was going to share a really interesting famous quote from Ulrich Neisser, who once advocated for the study of everyday memory. And he makes the joke about, the drunk who looks for his keys under the lamplight, and he knows they dropped them in the dark 10 feet away, and he says, well, why are you looking there? And the light's better here. And that is true. The light might be better in the laboratory, but the phenomena are out there. So a lot of my career has been dedicated to try to figure out methods. If any of you know, like, people who do, my best friend works at Scripps. He's a marine ecologist, and he has to find ways to track giant fish populations. He spends a lot of his time figuring out how to track movement and species. I think our field needs similar, there are surveillance worries. Maybe if I just tapped the NSA database, like, this whole problem could be solved. But I think we should have that same kind of methods discussion if we really care about how people think and create out in the world and how they move around and use their ideas and move them around. So again, the kind of work I do is ethnographic, meaning I go out into the world and try to figure out what's going on for the people who I'm studying. And to capture these events at a scale that I can understand them, I use video recordings, and I know a number of people here do that as well. And then I analyze those recordings. And there's a lot of trust you have to build with people and get them to think you're not going to do anything unfair with their video. But I've had a lot of success over 20 years doing that. For this study, I kind of didn't tell you the truth that there weren't any sort of ethnographic studies of video gameplay. There were some. But if you had looked at any of the data of any of those studies, a small number, a friend of mine, Constance Steinkühler, had done a couple of them, what you would have seen is data that only came from here. So you were only getting the events that happened in the interface. Now, as an ethnographer who studies how people interact, what they share, how they talk to each other, that's kind of a big hole, because people do things together. And so we invented a new method for capturing data. I don't know, I mean, there's obviously split screens been around in cinema for a long time, but we figured out how to make it practicable inside using commercial video and things like that. So we captured video from what was going on in the room, in this case, a brother and sister looking at a screen, and what was on the screen, and we synchronized them. So that allows you to see what resources are being used, what kind of talk is going on in the room, and how it relates to what's going on in the game. So that was an attempt to, and so we have a paper in a book called The Ecology of Games that Katie Salen, a game person, edited it if you want to see more about this. That method was an attempt to connect what was going on in-game to in-room. The study was also designed to capture the relationship. For the psychologists in the room, we all think a lot about transfer. How something happens here is meaningful there. Those questions are often asked about school things. They're often asked about transfer from school task to school task. But I think the juiciest versions of transfer questions are the ones about how something you do might impact life outside of school. So we didn't answer these transfer questions, but we at least posed them. And I wanted to share a funny cautionary tale from Liz Lemon of 30 Rock about transfer. So I'll just play this for you. Thought it was. So that's what psychologists call negative transfer. But I think the questions are real about the ways that people learn from games and take those things into the real world. There's a student who worked with us at Washington. He was interested in how leading guilds in World of Warcraft, this was a question I posed to him early on in his graduate career, how does leading a guild in World of Warcraft make you a leader or not in the real world? So the questions we ask about transfer can be asked about games. So now I want to share with you a finding. Actually, I'm going to share with you a video again of an example that I think is helpful for us to think about what cognition looks like when we get outside of schools, when we get outside of labs. And the argument I'll make, and this is something I've seen across the kind of work I've done, is that cognition out there and learning out there in the sea of blue is adaptive, that's Hutchins' definition, but it's also made of strange parts. And I think you'll see that strange part here. A friend of mine who works in the same tradition, whose name is Chuck Goodwin, recently, a couple of years ago actually, we were talking at a thing together, and someone asked him, why do you bother to go out into the field and do these things? And his answer was this: because you can't make this stuff up sitting in your office. And so I'm going to give you an example of something you can't make up sitting in your office. This is an instance of gameplay from the video game study I just described, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more. A sister and a younger brother. She's playing a Harry Potter game. It's a series of leveling up challenges. She has to follow quests and capture objects, avoid various ghouls and whatnots. And you'll see her playing the game, him in a watching mode, and then you'll see her draw him in a certain way. So just watch how that happens. And I'm going to show you 2 clips, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. See if I can manage this.
Tara, sing a song, please. What? Please sing something. I didn't.
Tiny Tim song?
I don't care.
I had a little turtle. His name was Ethan. He built it in the backyard. See the people play. He drank up all the water. He ate up all the salt. He tried to eat the bathtub, but it only let down his throat. I'm singing. And up, that's a walker by his toes and his feet.
Okay, you have something.
Did you hear what she said to him there? Okay, you can stop now. And he stops. Okay. Keep that in mind. We watch a little bit further on into the same day. She's facing another challenge. So watch this clip in relation to the one you just saw. And you'll see him be ready to go. He's tired. He's tired of just watching. He's going to try to take off.
I will sing the song again, timer.
From the Tiny Tim.
Yep.
doctor. The doctor called the nurse. The nurse called the lady. The alligator first time seen me. Wiener, wiener, and a minor, mama, mama. Help ya with her whopper. By his toes and his feet. Hollers, hollers, hollers. Don't let him go on singing. Eater, meaner, and a minor, mo. I woke up Sunday morning, and there upon the wall, mosquitoes and the bedbugs were playing a game of foul. I'm singing, minor, minor, mama, mama. Catch a whipper whopper by his toes and his feet. Hollers,
So it's cute, but does it mean anything? And I think it does. And what I think it means is that if you think about how cognition is organized out in the world, outside, here's how you're supposed to do it, people create these very odd adaptive systems that often wrap in other people. So did anyone notice what was missing from this scene, normal video game play? Anyone have something not in the... The audio track was missing, exactly, good. So why was the audio track missing? Here's the story. This girl, for whatever reason, is truly and fully afraid of slugs. Real life slugs, simulated slugs. They scare her to death. Turns out in the Harry Potter game, there's a bunch of slugs. And they make this icky slurping sound. She cannot bear to listen to it. But she's a video game player, and that modality of sound is important. So the argument we've made about this is that literally he becomes the soundtrack for her gameplay. And we have some evidence internal to that, right? As soon as she solves the first challenge, stop it now. Gets to another challenge sequence, shh. We have further evidence from interviews. One time her brother wasn't around, she said to my research assistant, Tom Satwitz, who was doing this field work, now I need my brother to come and sing me that song. And she actually didn't undertake play in this game because he wasn't there to sing the song. So to me, this is an object example of all the interesting, complicated ways that the world organizes cognition, or people organize cognition to get the things done that they want to do, that we really don't have an account of. And those are the exciting things for me, to capture more things like this. And I could show you a dozen of these, but let me tell you what it generalizes to in the study that we wrote. That was one example of what we in a paper called learning arrangements. And the claim we made is that in gameplay, so what you can take as a given in gameplay is that kids care about succeeding in gameplay. That motivational issue, that's already in place. But when that's in place, what we found is, by the way, none of these people are trained teachers. They're all young people. They invent a dizzying array of creative and productive learning arrangements, meaning they find ways to help other people learn. So I'm just going to give you 3 examples across the top. Many people in this room are probably familiar with the idea of Lev and Wenger's legitimate peripheral participation, which is basically a notion about apprenticeship, and you move towards more of central tasks as people who are mastery help you get there. This group of 2 brothers and a younger sister physically embodied that very thing. So when kids are playing games, there's often boring tasks, not when they're at the challenge level, not like the girl we just saw. So that's before they level up. Those 2 boys would, and the younger sister was quite a bit younger, she would sit at the margins, at the periphery, and be playing a handheld game toy. They would pause the game, bring her into the action, and let her do the boring leveling up task, which was, for her, a challenge. I'm not saying it was a nice brotherly thing to do, but then when she had reached that point, they would pause again and move her back to the periphery, and she would watch from that periphery. So this was something they invented to take out some of the tedium for themselves, and for her to learn, which she cared about. So that's an invented learning arrangement. These 2 boys, they were doing a kind of a Mario jumping game, and if you've played those games or seen them, there's a lot of keystrokes and a lot of stuff you got to do with your fingers. This boy was playing. This boy was more expert, but he was trying to tell him initially how to do the buttons. Hit this, wasn't working. So he unplugged the other controller since he wasn't playing, And so this is what he did. He took the controller, and it's not in this picture, I'm sorry, but he came and he brought the controller up into his field of vision so the kid could see both the screen and the buttons at the same time, and he looked at it as if he was playing, and that turned out to be effective to teach the other kid the sequence of strokes. And in this case, more expert player and a sister who was older, he would play and she would just throw out ideas. And most of the time it seemed like he wasn't paying any attention, so we've analyzed the video. But once in a while, something would sort of come through the transom and he would pick that idea up, the thing she threw at him. So it was sort of this strange just-in-time system. We have dozens of examples of kids inventing these learning arrangements. So what? Well, here's the so what, I think. Jim G. wrote this justifiably famous book about what video games have to teach us about learning. Made an argument there, which was a sore spot for a lot of people who spent their lives doing curriculum design. He said, game designers just turned out to figure out what's eluded all you curriculum designers forever. We figured out how to structure learning. We've embedded it in games. And so that's why video games are better learning environments. We looked at our ethnographic data. We came up with this idea of these invented learning arrangements. We said, Jim, not so fast. Maybe something of the structure of the game has something to do with it, but we can visibly see a lot of the learning not in the game structure, but in the interactional structure in the room. And so that has been an ongoing theoretical argument. I'm happy to call Jim G. a friend, so it's not like we fundamentally disagree. And you'll see in the work that I'm going to share about design, we've made use of both of these ideas. So let me tell you a couple theoretical and empirical lessons that I took away from this. This idea of everyday innovation is ubiquitous, and we don't really study enough of it, and that's really interesting to me. The learning arrangements point. People who are not trained as teachers find ways to help other people learn, even if they don't know themselves. Sometimes they know, and sometimes they share what they know, but they find ways, like the sister who didn't know, who threw stuff out to the kids. And finally, that we have preconceptions about media. Usually it's like one person, one screen preconceptions. We have found across all of this work that media practices are far more social in the way people interact. If you have kids, watch them play video games together. People want to get involved. People want to give advice. So we've been trying to leverage the idea of the socialness of media practice, and this is here where I'm going to jump over to the fence and say, here's how we're trying to use it to think about design. And this is work that I've done with the Joan Gans Cooney Center, which is associated with Sesame Workshop. Their Sesame Workshop has always been about Sesame Street and Electric Company. Over the last 5 years, they've really tried to expand their understandings and their work around all children's media. This is a report I wrote with their head of research, Lori Takeuchi, who actually was in Rob and Emma's cohort at Stanford. What the work we did in the game study and in the TV study and the history of this term co-viewing comes from an old idea about Sesame Street, that if parents sit with kids and interact with them about the media, they learn a lot more. So I came up with this concept to generalize that idea of co-viewing to joint media engagement. And so we wrote a document that had case studies, but also design principles for how, if people are going to be interacting around media, can we use that as a design resource? Because when you think about media design, it typically is just within that narrow frame of one person, one box. And so this has become, at least Lori reported to me when I saw her last week, this has become a really useful tool for New York and other media producers around the country to think about what we can do. And I can, if you want to hear a fun game, I can share one with you. So, let's see where I'm at. Okay, we started about 8 minutes late. Now I want to tell you about the work. So I've kind of given you one line of work about the studies I've done that sort of fall into that cognitive ecology basic research, giving you a little glimmer of how it, I think, in the joint media engagement report, gives some ideas about design. But now I want to get more deliberate about how I have, over my career, designed things with others, tried to make them sustainable innovations, why some have failed, and why I think I've learned some lessons so that the ones I'm engaged with now aren't failing, at least not as fast. So experimenting with alternatives. I'm going to take you back to the first such project I was involved in that I will gladly call a failure in a certain way. I was a graduate student working on a project, NSF funded. This was project-based math. What we were doing was bringing images of professional work into classrooms. That was architecture, cartography, biology, what else do we have? Population biology. So kids were doing versions of those things. What we decided to do was to compare the work of kids doing population biology, or in the case of my dissertation, architecture, with actual architects. And why is that? Here's a rhetoric we all hear still all the time. Kids' mathematics needs to be more authentic. It needs to be, we hear that all the time. And again, remember the kind of argument I made for why I do some of these field studies? There's no field work. When this study was done initially, there was no field work on what actual math-using professionals did. So there was a lot of rhetoric, there were a lot of positions people took, but no one had bothered to go and look at architecture, biology, engineering, and say, what is the math they use? How do they use it? Do they use equations? Do they use computers? That hadn't been done. So that was the basis of my dissertation. The experiment failed in the following way. What happened was we had our 3-year NSF project. We packed up our bags and our cameras at the end of the year. We left. Within a half a year, the old ecosystem had swallowed up our little project-based environment, and things were back to normal. We had taken a time-honored approach. We had tried to work with a couple teachers who were willing, maverick-y even, but it was swallowed up. So here's why I think the experiment failed, and this is where I want to draw on that idea of infrastructure again. In the classroom, it really wasn't set up to support what architecture is fundamentally about, design, whereas the whole physical and material infrastructure of the architecture firm was set up for that. Another point, the representational infrastructure. If you're doing design, you need to be able to make your stuff, print it, mark it up. This was 1996. Thankfully, we don't have to go back there. But almost everything these kids did got kicked out of print queues because there was so little memory. So they couldn't print and work on their stuff. And then probably the most important point, which I'll get to as I think a major issue about the difference between the way schools organize learning and the way a lot of other settings do, is that assessment in the classroom was not set up. No one had built the machinery to document all the productive kids things were doing about design, and in fact, the mathematics that was supporting design, so they fell back on standard measures of mathematics, and so the kids who were really taking the work seriously were getting lost between the cracks. So I want to move along a little bit, and this I'm going to go through really quickly just to run a thread here. So that experiment failed, but it led to the generation of one of what I think are one of my more durable concepts, which is an idea called disciplined perception. And at the time, when I was in graduate school at Berkeley, most of the views of cognition were very mentalistic. And when I studied people working and doing and thinking together, I saw a lot more movement and a lot more talk and a lot more hands and a lot more eyes. And so I came up with this concept to try to show that when people work in their disciplined ways, that it's very active, it's multimodal, it's speech, it's pointing here and saying, let's draw this line. And so this is just an image to be a gestalt for you of engineers working together. This was one of the cases I used to develop it. And if you look right in here, what you see is one line of speech from this engineer, and these are all the actions that happen within that line of speech. And he's crossing over 5 different representational media and connecting them all up. So to me, cognition looks like that. So that's what I think is a durable concept. But the strange thing is, one of the things that I was led away from is here's what people do together when they're teaching and learning. So that's the disciplining perception. I'm going to show you how to do things with my hands and our eyes, and we're pointing and we're saying this and that. You want to stretch that a bit? That's what I saw ubiquitously in the experiences I was studying. It came to my mind that could we build a technology to support that very practice so that those things could be done asynchronously? And so without getting into it, you can read papers about this. This is currently a project that's a little bit on hiatus, but I'm going to show you an example of this piece of software that was generated out of the disciplining perception concept called video traces. And it's a simple idea. What you do, this is the interface. I just recorded this. It only runs on the previous OS for Mac, so I couldn't run it on here. This is my son. You'll get a little introduction. My son, Will. He wanted to help me with this, so this was a prior version. He made some silly faces, and we made annotations. So one of the features we lifted off of everyday interaction that we saw is that people point and look, and it's the synchronies of those things. Like, okay, if you're map reading, I want you to go down this road and stop right here and then turn there. I'm not using technical language. I'm saying here and there. And because your eyes are following my hands while the words are going, it works. So we tried to embed those resources in video traces, and I'm going to show you just briefly how it works as one example of going from an attempted intervention that I believe did fail in a legitimate sense to a concept that led to a tool that did have a lot of durability. And then there's a story, in fact, about how it is at least a partially failed innovation too. But here's how it works. The mouth pressed inside there. Let's continue on. Let's see what happens here. Waving back and forth. Tongue out. Oh, changing to a new move. Now notice it was the thumbs before. And so as soon as you pull the cursor into the screen, it records where you're pointing. Temples of the head. Interesting. I wonder what he's up to, this kid. You can change the time structure of the video and keep talking over it. You can do it with still images as well. Oh, wait, pause. Look how he's collapsed his whole face there. Now, if his nose was draw on it. It would come down like this. See, it would come like this. It would come straight down through here. But see how it goes? He's bent his nose. Clearly
Wait. Oh, this has been smushed by the hands.
Yeah, that's right.
And then...
So that's a silly example, but it turns out that that tool with those resources was used by radiologists at the University of Washington, the conducting program, the dance program, the film studies people, anyone whose work was about the rowing team, a great use on the rowing team, anyone whose work was about commenting on and trying to improve physical human practice. And so it turned out to have all these uses. So now I'm going to tell you with my remaining minutes about two of my most current projects that are also in the design space and link it up with that sustainability of innovation argument that I've been talking about. Here's one move we can make. If we think the structures of school are entrenched, we can design for learning outside of school. It's an interesting challenge, right? How can we do that? So one project I have with a colleague named Mike Horn, who's a computer scientist and also in my learning sciences department, is to try to answer this question. Can this forgotten, quote, computer be a resource for learning? As we know, this is a programmable thermostat, and we have a project funded by NSF through cyber learning that we're calling Green Home Games. Here's what Green Home Games asks. The question is, can we augment household systems to make them a site for family learning? Okay? People ostensibly care about energy and money, and they have different values. Can we actualize that in some way? Can we create a whole family learning experience? And can we build from people's different views about comfort and money and environmental footprint? And can we build on shared, and this is basically one of my primary design philosophies, is can we build on existing cultural forms of activity, which links up with a lot of people who think about culturally responsive teaching and learning, is if that family plays games together, to be literal about it, can we use that resource to be a site for learning? So our test case that NSF agreed we should give a shot to is home heating and cooling, and the devices through which we're interacting are thermostats. There's some challenges we had to overcome. For example, the set it and forget it phenomena with the thermostat, which a lot of people probably in this room use. The black box character of thermostats, you can't really get much data out of thermostats, and the interface doesn't give much information. And then a nice phrase from my colleague, Mike, he calls it the energy patriarch, which is that in a lot of homes, it's usually the father or the man in the house who says, only I touch the thermostat. So those seem like challenging conditions to create learning experiences around this thing, but there's potential there. So we've created a game, and the game is a combination of a board game and an iPad simulation interface. And the way the game works is that you pick a character. At this point, it's an animal, so there's a bit of play in there. You start somewhere on this board that I just showed you. This is the board here. And the object of the game is to work to get around one season in Chicago or Champaign-Urbana kind of weather. You have to get around 1 year, not exhaust all your money, and accumulate a number of points in 2 categories. One are comfort points, so you got to be comfortable enough, and you have to get enough green points. And so the simulation interface works this way. You get a weather condition in a month. In this case, it's January. You have a character. Say you're playing with 3 people. You each have a character. You're doing this collectively. It's a collaborative game. And in this point in the simulation, this group has 4 green points and 3 comfort points. And I think obviously with games, you play around with how many you should get. We're playing around with new interfaces. This is a more kid-friendly interface that we've had designed. So in the game, what you do is you get that situation, and then you set a thermostat. That's on the iPad. You set the thermostat, and then you run the simulation. Now, one of the things that happens in this game, and I'm going to show you an example of this in a second, one of the things that happens in this game is after 1 round of play for families, so this is not programmable, right? We've built a new interface for a programmable, so this is a lot more friendly to interact with than the programmable Honeywell sorts of things. You just push these up and down, you push these over, and that's how you set your temperatures. Well, what happens then is in every instance we've had families play this. 1 round of gameplay gets something that the PSAs that have existed for 20 years about programmable thermostats don't seem to get, which is a realization that I can do way better with a programmable thermostat than I can with a single analog 1 set temperature setting. So what happens is you make your settings, then you run a simulation, and these zones, which may be hard to see in the back, are the comfort zones. And what you're trying to do, and this is a realistic, Mike's a computer scientist, so this is a real model of how temperature varies with a thermostat. And what people are trying to do is snake that through so that they do this trade-off. And life is about trade-offs. A lot of these kind of systems of learning about trade-offs. Can I get enough green points? Can I get enough comfort points without paying too much money? And so that's the nature of the game. I want to show you briefly what some of the gameplay looks like from one of the families and then take you to my final example.
This is where it's going to be if you leave it on. Where am I at? Why does that go so? I think you should leave it. Leave it off? Yeah.
They're deciding to not even turn on the thermostat based on the outside thermal conditions, which is a choice you can make, and a lot of us make it all the time, right?
Does he?
It's 82.
Okay. But keep it at 70, right?
Yeah.
Push play.
They're running the simulation.
He wasn't even comfortable.
He wasn't even comfortable.
You're just looking at the money. You don't even look at where you're going.
Not a great run in this game. Not even comfortable, and they spent a lot of money. I'm not going to show you the next example because I want to get onto my last example because it's the one that Jim mentioned and it's engaged most of my energy. But this game is one way to approach the question of learning innovations, which is do them outside of schools. But I care about schools, and a lot of people care about schools, so is there some way to crack this nut? And so I'm going to give you a story about, and so this was the project I described before, the project-based thing. I did another project that was trying to connect up history and science to do an interdisciplinary thing. We had the same thing happen. It was great while it was going on, and as soon as our money and our support went away, it dried up and disappeared, and they went back to the subjects and silos. So here's the problem we've posed for ourselves in the Fuse studios that I'm going to describe in a minute, is our working solution. Can we design for, implement, and sustain learning experiences that have the best qualities of informal environments and at least one particular good quality of formal environments? And so can we create and sustain an alternative infrastructure for STEAM learning? And we're using the A in STEM because we think the arts part of it is really important. It's very sustaining as part of this enterprise. So what are Fuse Studios? In a minute, I'm going to show you a video we produced for MacArthur after our pilot year in 2011, which tells the story quickly. But what are they in brief? It's a game-based model of STEM-based exploration and learning. Not in the sense of video games, but it has the structure of video games. So what you do is you do a challenge, you succeed at the challenge, then you level up. And we're doing this in public libraries and after-school programs in the Chicago area. We have 19 that are ongoing. We have 18 that are ongoing and 19 on our wait list. This has all been within a 2-year span that it's grown like this. Our deliberate goal is to expand participation in these STEM things to kids who have already been considered, you're out. And I won't share the numbers with you, but we're being quite successful so far in drawing kids who would never have gotten interested in these things, in part because it's not coded as STEM or STEAM. Our approach to building these challenges is radically iterative. And what we do is we have some of the video game designer's mentality. We're not designing video games. So you'll see an example of some of these things. Kids work with robots, and they work with biomaterials, and they work with Arduinos. And they do challenge, and they level up, and they level up, and they level up, and they do that. But what if they're in a sequence, and suddenly, and you'll see an example of this, kids stop being interested? Is that because they're not learning or something's wrong with them? No, we're trying to really walk the talk in terms of something isn't right in our design sequence. And so we have to make the step size bigger or smaller, or that challenge needs to be more interesting. And so we have this pretty iterative model of how the challenges grow and change over time. And I'll show you how we're doing that. So with that, let me just jump in and show you the video that I think gives you a good story about what the Fuse Studios are about. And here it is. This was the original name, USTEM.
It's not hard to see why today's youth aren't more engaged with science, technology, engineering, and math. Even if they are fortunate enough to have a passionate, well-prepared teacher, our school system can make learning even the most fascinating STEM topics a tedious exercise in memorization. It's not that youth can't get interested in mastering complex, challenging tasks, especially when those tasks require creativity and innovation. We just have to take the interests of young people more seriously. The question is, where do we start? One place we can get inspiration from is video games. Games are very engaging for most young people, and researchers have shown that they involve complex, often collaborative problem solving. Precisely those skills at the core of productive STEM activity.
When all a video game is problem solving. It's just a series of, if you think about it, in some weird way, a video game is just an assessment. All you do is get assessed every moment as you try to solve a problem, and if you don't solve it, the game says you failed. Try again, and then you solve it, and then you have a boss, which is a test, and you pass the test. I mean, games essentially are a form of assessment, the thing that is probably the most painful, ludicrous part of schooling. But in a game, it's a lot of fun, right? Because it's handled in a very different way.
At Northwestern University, we are using these insights about gaming to design a wide range of interest-driven challenges. We call this project USTEM because it seeks to connect the interests of youth to STEM through a carefully designed set of challenges. What makes our approach unique is the way we organize these challenges. Since young people are interested in many different things, there are lots of entry points. Each challenge is designed to be immediately accessible and engaging, much like the first levels in a video game. These entry points serve as hooks, piquing interest in the challenge. Our challenge design encourages kids to move from this initial interest into deeper engagement. As kids level up, the challenges get harder, requiring them to apply knowledge and skills from previous levels. Those who make it to advanced levels can earn badges as a formal recognition of their skills. This supports kids moving from hanging out to messing around to geeking out, from participating because their friends are to participating because they've developed a genuine interest. There is a lot of help and support available for completing a challenge, but only on demand. Kids can ask a coach for help or use online tutorials or videos. To complete a level, an individual or group of kids posts a video or other artifact to a social media site and records their accomplishment on the achievement board. Some challenges award bonus points for solutions that are especially creative or elegant. For example, in Robot Mini Golf, any team whose robot completes all the levels in a single turn without needing reprogramming earns double bonus points. In school, failing is bad. Failure is a source of perpetual anxiety that causes students to be very conservative and risk-averse. It also is a big turnoff for all but the highest performing students. In USTEM, failing on a challenge is really just another try. Failing is an opportunity to learn and improve, not something to be avoided. Our format supports interest-driven exploration. Kids can explore a wide range of challenges in a risk-free way, and then geek out and go deep on challenges that they're interested in. So far, the reactions have been positive.
I already knew that this is going to be fun. I already knew that for sure. Because like when we had the robots and the Legos, I'm like, okay, it's going to be fun.
One of the most memorable for me probably was when we made the music after we created the circle machine. This one thing that we made could do so many things. You know, and like we made a machine. Well, we didn't make the motor, but we made the motor able to do these different tasks.
It ended up working pretty good. Like I kind of liked how my tower turned out to be, and that was kind of cool.
So like when we got number 1 passed, the number 2 was kind of easy too. Then 3, say kind of simple as you. All you have to do is hit the launch pad and then go over the bridge. Then it started getting easier. Then I see now, like we was number 1. I'm like, okay, then we doing something right.
I think it gave us a lot of creativity. Like it gave us a lot of freedom to do what we wanted and create something that's completely our own.
Now we're tied for second. I think we tied for second. And it's real fun. I like it. You know, I like to do this again. You know.
Yay!
Yes! Yes!
As you might imagine, this approach to STEM learning requires a very different approach to teaching. In USTEM, teachers and other experts play a supporting role. We want to have youth pull the information they need, rather than have it pushed on them as it happens in school.
As a coach, as a resource more than a direct instructor, I think everybody, nearly all teachers would enjoy doing that.
They're all working in their pairs, but each one was discovering things at different times, and to see their faces light up when they figured something out was really just great to watch.
USTEM will also require a very different kind of space to learn in. Our inspiration is U-Media, a teen-only space in Chicago's Harold Washington Library that was designed to support the hanging out, messing around, geeking out framework. We're working with local high schools, the Chicago Public Library, and other partners to try out USTEM. Later on, we plan to scale up to a large number of schools and community sites. Our efforts so far are just the beginning. We envision a growing universe of new levels and challenges that engage kids in STEM learning. As we continue to design and test new challenges, we are excited about the impact the USTEM experience has had on youth and its possibilities for the future.
So with just a few remaining minutes, I want to pull out some of the features of why this is an alternative infrastructure. Hopefully you got a glimmer of that in what you just saw. This is the interface that kids see on the web when they go to challenges. So they select a challenge and then they proceed from there. I said that I'm trying to address this question about how to do innovation in schools. What I've come to after many failures that I've been part of is what I think of as a Trojan horse strategy, which is set up just outside the walls of the school day and wait to get invited in. So in the context of that picture I showed earlier, put the learning innovation here, not in the school where the stresses of, if you know anything about the field of island biogeography, if I put a small innovation in there, this ecosystem is going to swallow it up. But maybe if we put it right out here in a public library and after-school club, we might have a different effect. In terms of success, we have, this was as of July of this year, we had 18 active studios and we had 19 on the wait list. For me, I know a project is working when I don't have to go knock on doors of teachers or other people and say, will you try this? But they're coming and asking us. So what are some of the elements here? I talked a little bit about challenge design. We have an interesting model here. We work with partners. We work with the Field Museum. We work with Motorola. We work with the vacuum people at Dyson. They work with us to either design challenges anew or to challengize, as we call it, existing educational materials. So, for example, the Chicago Architecture Foundation has incredible materials about designing structures that relate to the elements, heat, sun, whatever, but they're kind of sitting in a box. They're kind of project-based, so we're working with them to challengize them, to sequence them in these ways, and then here's what I think is a smart strategy here. Their brand gets out all over Chicago, and coming down to the hard-to-get-to remote Chicago Architecture Foundation or finding human beings to go out into the schools and do this, that problem doesn't exist. So it's a way to get the work that people are doing that's really cool out there. As I said, dynamic design and iteration model. If challenge, I'm going to show you this briefly, but if challenges aren't working, we tinker with them or we get them out. We absolutely refuse to say there's something wrong with the kids, they're not learning. It's bad design or not successful enough design yet. And here's one of the novel things we're doing, because we have the website and kids go on and try this, and we have now a bigger and bigger population. I wouldn't call this big data, but here's a novel way we're using what I call biggish data to identify challenges, what need work. You already saw this. You didn't see the full idea of how we're doing assessment. We can't have a teacher assess all these things. We're putting assessment in the hands of the youth. So you saw how they document it with a video record. Then what happens is we have 2 kids that you have to get 2 other kids to certify that you've completed the challenge. They just go in and they check it off. If they certify, you unlock the next challenge. That's working well. And I was going to show you an example of that. If you want to see it after, I can show you, but I won't show you. It's a girl showing you her self-documentation on the spaghetti tower. Here's another strategic move that we're making in terms of long-term trajectories. As kids move up the challenge sequences, we let the challenges get more open-ended. Okay? The other thing we're doing, and this Motorola is our test case right now, Motorola Mobility, which is outside Chicago, bought by Google. We've worked with our engineers to design a hardware and a software challenge. We've got them to agree, at least tentatively, that if kids go through the entire sequence, either the hardware or the software challenge, they will give those kids internships at Motorola for the summer. So here is an alternative pathway into a legitimate STEM activity in a place that people care about, and they would get a free Moto Active, by the way. They like that. That is an alternative pathway to internships than AP Physics. And just to say those kids you saw there in the pilot, those were all, and we did the pilot for a variety of reasons with these kids, those were all vocational and tech ed kids in Illinois. So science educators in the room, you're probably wondering, okay, that's cool, they're building stuff, they're probably developing tacit knowledge. What about the formalisms? You know, that's what we care about. That's not all we care about, but we care about those things. They're never going to hear about F equals MA. Well, we don't know about the relationship between regular school and this, but we do have a story about this. And as a person who cares about these things and who sort of finds beauty, I was a math major in college, by the way, in these formalisms, I don't want them to be these inert things you remember. So here's how we're thinking about it in terms of the game metaphor. Make the challenges harder, make the challenges harder, make the challenges harder, until I offer you a resource that I tell you, you're going to need this to solve this challenge. F equals MA, or we're actually trying to work on this is a simplification of the Bernoulli principle, and this is a liquid flowing out of a small orifice in a structure, and so basically kids are going to have to shoot the water into something. this is the equation. It's simple math. It's multiplication, division, and addition. But there's no way you figure this out without this. So in the metaphor of games, they call those cheat codes. Here's a secret that can get you a solution to the things. And so we want kids to think of these as cheat codes and to have the formalisms be sticky, that they actually stick to the world. And I think even if kids don't become math and science people, if they find one great example of an equation that sticks to the world and did work for them, even on a cultural literacy, we've gone a mile. So the last thing I'll share with you, and then I'll end. I am not over time because you all you were eating lunch. So we're keeping track of stuff, and this is the biggest data point. We are generating these activity maps. This is work in progress. It's changing. One of our studios is called Studio One. This is a map of all the participants across all the challenges over time. We use these to read what challenges are being attempted, which challenges are not being attempted, which ones are being logged as complete. And so what this allows us to do, for example, is zero in on a pattern that we see here that then we can look at further.